We begin with changes ignited that day 6 years ago this week at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High that are very much in play right now. 6 years ago in Tallahassee, in the face of grief-stricken and outraged families and students, a conservative Florida legislature and governor passed unprecedented state gun safety laws while protecting Floridians' gun rights and protections. Right now in Tallahassee, some lawmakers are suggesting some of that should be rolled back. And at the same time, lawmakers are supporting bills that do add layers of more school security. 6 years ago this week, the mayor of Parkland was in the midst of those families' catastrophe. Since 2020, Christine Hunchofsky is a state representative and a leading voice on school safety and on mental health. And as you can see, Christine Hunchofsky, Democrat from Parkland, right here with us live from Tallahassee. State Rep, so good to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Glenna, for having me. And I really appreciate you highlighting the work that's, been done since 2018 and the work that we're doing going forward to keep our schools and our communities as safe as they can be.
100%. And in the last, well, let's start there, because in the last 6 years, there's changeover in Tallahassee. New people come in. This state is filled with urban and rural areas, and especially gun safety laws are always in play and in contention. And I want to sort of frame, at least for the beginning of our discussion, some of the gun laws going through. And right now, one that's getting so much attention is one that attempts to roll back the age at which someone can buy a long gun. Right now, it's 21, which is in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act. And a bill is moving to roll it back to 18, which is where it was before. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things that the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act did is that it addressed all three areas that that will help keep our community safe and our schools safe: mental health, school hardening, and also responsible firearm ownership. And those three things have paid off in the years since. And the idea now that 6 years later, we're going to go back and roll back one of these three things doesn't make any sense to me. There is no data to support that it will do anything to make our community safer. And in fact, long guns are the gun of choice by school shooters. And if you see, what's also happened is we have these expanded background checks for people who are aged 18 to 21, because that's still an area of concern regarding school shootings.
And they've worked, I think, by and large. This was a bipartisan effort across the board in Tallahassee. And those rules and all the components have really, I think, everyone would agree, have really gone a long way to make this state safer. So right now, go ahead.
Agreed. I mean, I call it the gold standard because it addressed all three aspects of school safety: the mental health, the school hardening, and the responsible firearm ownership side.
Yes. Yes. And so I want to go into this particular bill right now because it is getting so much attention. Federal law actually places the age limit for long guns at 18. That is the federal law. So this would be, I guess, rolling back Florida to meet the federal standard. And the sponsor, as I understand it, had advocated this for his rural area where long guns are a part of the daily culture. So what practical effect do you think rolling back this one component might have?
I think it'll have a negative effect. And the reason I believe that is because that is kind of what the data has shown throughout the country, that long guns are the gun of choice among school shooters, and that 18 to 21 years of age is still a very age that we should be looking at and be careful about. I just don't understand why we're going to be rolling something back that has been proven to work. And there is no data that has been brought by the sponsor or anybody else in support of that bill that would show that that is in any way making our schools or our community safer. And at a time when we have so much anxiety and we hear about shootings in other states, it's so important that we do everything we can to keep our schools safe.
There are other gun-related bills going through right now, and at least one of them, and maybe more, are yours. I want to talk about HB 291, which you're sponsoring, that would It's about putting in background checks, generally sales through licensed dealers only, safe storage. all kinds of things that sound very common sense and frankly bipartisan, what everyone can get behind. And yet it appears, at least in the computer records, that it's been stalled since its first reading a month ago and change. What is happening with that?
Yeah, so the bill is going nowhere, just as it did last year. I named it the Responsible Gun Ownership Act because it's very simple stuff, universal background check. So you should have a background check before you are able to purchase a firearm. Education also at the time of purchase about safe storage, selling a gun lock or something else to keep the gun secure at the time of purchase, and making sure that we're regulating ghost guns. So somebody can't just go online, buy parts of a gun and put it together, have a firearm with no background check and no serial number. Pretty common sense stuff. It never made it to its first committee. All those early subcommittees are no longer meeting. So it is essentially DOA this session.
What are the conversations behind the scenes about that? I know you talk to your colleagues, right, and explain.
I do.
What is that conversation? Take us back. What is the conversation about that?
Yeah, most people agree with everything that's in that legislation. It's just about whether, so anything dealing with firearm safety for some reason in our country and in our state is kind of like a third rail, something no one wants to really touch, people don't want to get involved in. And even though they might agree personally, no one is willing to really take a step and put it forward because of all the controversy that's always surrounding it. But I have to remind people that when the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act was passed, it was absolutely, like you mentioned, a very bipartisan piece of legislation that really changed so much and made our schools and communities safer in the state of Florida. And everyone at that time who was up for re-election got re-elected. So in spite of the storm and the loud noise around it, this is stuff that the people of Florida want. And if you go look at polls, people support universal background checks. People support safe storage. People support responsible firearm ownership. And I think it would be great if the legislature would make a move in that direction as well.
So much of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act deals with mental health. You have done a lot of work in that regard. We are up against a break, so let's take a quick 2 minutes and we'll be right back and talk all about that part of the bill. We are back with State Representative Christine Hunchofsky, a Democrat from Parkland and former Parkland mayor, on this anniversary week of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas massacre, talking about gun bills currently going through, mental health. Before we get to the mental health component, State Rep Hunchofsky, I wanted to ask you about one more bill that you're sponsoring that deals with actually planning a mass shooting. Explain what's in that bill and how that would be different or additive to a law that governs mass shootings and the illegalities of it.
Yeah, it would just add that anybody who's planning something like that would also be subject to criminal prosecution, so that we're not just talking about somebody who's carrying it out or attempted, but also in the planning section.
And how would you know that? And how would you differentiate a real, authentic plan for mass murder with maybe mental health issues that a 16 or 17-year-old might have?
Yeah, so a lot of the mass shooters had ahead of time a lot of documentation that they were doing to show that they had a real plan to go through with it. And that would be something that we would be looking at for that legislation.
And to your point earlier in the last segment, just the conversations between all of your colleagues, Democrat and Republican, in Tallahassee right now, grappling with, especially on this anniversary, when so many of them have actually visited the 1200 building as we go through and see whether these bills move or not. The mental health component of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act, there have been, I want to say, tens of millions of dollars put toward mental health. What are the practical effects of that you've seen?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that. We actually also have an additional bill this session adding on to it, coordinated care for children, to make sure that they're getting coordinated care in the schools and in the community. And then also making sure that there's follow-up with checking out what the measurable outcomes are and how the funding from the state is being used in addressing mental health in schools. You know, it's getting harder and harder for kids these days when you see the anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and our children today are really suffering. It is so important that we have funding and access to quality mental health care to help kids. Suicide has been on the rise. And just in our own community, I don't think people really understand in the aftermath of a mass shooting how it changes a community forever, and it changes the people who were there forever. And that is an ongoing thing that so many people in our community deal with. Of course, the families who lost loved ones, those who were injured, but also just the associated with trauma for everybody who was there that day.
And I guess worth it, yes, and I guess worth it to say or bring up how many, and I don't have the number right here, but how many school mass shootings have occurred since that day 6 years ago nationwide. You talk so much about mental health, and I think that is the ongoing reason why HB1, that social media bill, has been flying through the House and Senate. And you know there was a committee substitute that amended it with the Senate bill. You voted for that. That is a priority of House Speaker Paul Renner that essentially stops anybody 16 or younger from having a social media platform. How do you see that playing out practically? It does look like it will become law in Florida.
Yeah, there's still some debate on it, and I understand people's concerns. Parents can still have an account. So for somebody who's doing something where their job depends on it, so they can still have an account for their child. I think the concern comes in with social media of how accessible our children are to people out there that we don't know. They're also very accessible. You know, when we were growing up, you go to school and you might have a bad day of school, but you go home and you kind of are able to get separated from that. With social media today, that's harder and harder. You also have kids that get kind of sucked into groups that they shouldn't get into through social media. And I think for many of us, this was a statement also of saying that we need to be doing better. These algorithms have changed social media from the beginning. In the beginning, social media, you go on, but now with the algorithms, the content, what you're able to see online is very thought out ahead of time and something that you're not aware of. And there's just so many concerns. We hear from parents all the time, the concerns with social media. They're struggling to keep their own kids off of social media. So I think this bill is in many ways also a way to have that discussion, saying we need to do something now with social media and our children.
So how do you think though, practically speaking, a state law with, to your point, what parents struggle with right now, how does a state law change that?
Well, there will have to be an age verification for someone to have an account. And so that is already the first step in making sure that the children are safer online with the social media. So that's how it would work with the age verification, and they'd be required to do that in the state of Florida.
So you don't think like a teenager right now who wants to take mom's phone and get on a social media account that belongs to a parent could, you know, I guess parental responsibility is always key everywhere, and there are some critics who say this kind of takes that component away.
Yeah, and I understand the critics very much so. I'm very fortunate. Our boys are grown up now, and social media was never much of an issue for them. I do know other children where it has been an issue. And in the end, like you said, a child could go around and grab the parent's phone and get on through their account. I would argue the algorithms there would be a little different than they might have been for the child. And in the end, parental responsibility is always one of the #1 factors when coming to keeping our kids safe.
Amen to that. Christine Hunchofsky, it is always good to have you on the program. Thank you so much, and please do keep in touch with all of those things that are so important to you as they work their way through Tallahassee.
Thank you so much, Glenna.